And what's going on, everybody? Welcome back. This is LoreForged, the podcast for Ashes of Creation and the podcast for LoreForged.com. We're back at the tavern, and we are your hosts. My name is Jibbs, and I'm joined by Sonny.
I've been told that I say just a bit too much in the pre-show notes, so I'm gonna try to cut that out tonight. Hi, how are you?
I'm fantastic. How are you?
I'm fantastic. I just got back from the Boundary Waters. I'm going to let you introduce Kash, and I'm going to tell you how excited I am to be back in the living world.
All right, fantastic. And Kash is here as well.
I am here, and thanks for letting me be a part of this. Jibbs, I have a gauntlet to throw down to you right now. If you can get through this episode without any mispronunciations, I will do something drastic of your choice.
Oh, challenge accepted.
Oh, this is going to be a burner, too, for that challenge.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, it is.
This is really the worst. Oh, how you gentlemen doing? What's shaking? Sonny, you're back.
I'm great. I went out to the Boundary Waters. I was off the grid for 4 days. It was fantastic. And I thought, it's a weird thing when you go off the grid like that you think about all of the other stuff in your life and just how you can come back to the normal world and be a little bit rejuvenated. So I, believe it or not, I'm super excited to do a podcast about a video game that's not even out. And that was caused by not having any access to any video games whatsoever. So life is a very strange thing, and I just thought I would bring that weird little anachronism to the forefront here.
I feel like it's the same way when you're sick. Like, you know how everyone feels when you can't get out of bed, and you're like, I just want to live again. I have all these things I want to live for, these things I want to do in life. And then you get better and you don't do any of it.
First of all, I have to look up anachronism now, so thank you very much for that. And second of all, I just want to know, and we need the truth here, did you role play a Niküa while you were at the Boundary Waters fishing?
Oh, that's awesome.
So I'm not entirely sure if I used the word anachronism correctly there, but it is a strange thing when you are out off the grid like that, because we as people so rarely unplug, and you realize just how plugged in you are after about 2 days of not having any access to anything. And I do mean no access to anything. You are entirely without cell phone service or anything like that. It was to the point where one of the guys said, hey, I don't know what the rules are, but what do you think? Should I play some music? And the other three guys are like, I don't think so. I think we're just going to roll with this as the zero technology trip. And we did. And it truly does make you appreciate the time that you can get away. And maybe, like JB said, you get these grandiose plans about whether you can do this in the real world. And the reality is you can't. It'll be about a month before I go back to checking my phone constantly throughout the day. But I think that it's a good thing to do every now and then.
You want to know something funny? I actually had that realization of how much we truly are connected to our devices and connected to the internet. I will tell a very short little story about the time that I dropped my brand new iPhone 12 out of a helicopter.
Oh,
This is a true story. I was out on a shift training, and I usually would keep my iPhone in like a shoulder pocket, and somehow it came out and I couldn't find my phone when we were on our way back to base. And I'm just going, I think, I mean, you try to admit that to your pilot and your crew chief. I think I dropped my iPhone, and immediately, excuse me, you did what? Luckily, we were over wilderness area, and I was able to call my daughter. She did find my iPhone. There's a point to this story, I promise. Find my iPhone. Lo and behold, it's there, like in the middle of the wilderness. There's no way I'm going to get this thing right. We even went back to look for it. Couldn't find it. Anyway, that night, I'm driving home after the shift, and I'm not like a panicky type of guy, but I'm almost panicked because I have no music. It's dead silent. I can't listen to a podcast. I can't take a phone call. I was so like flipped out about the entire thing. I drove straight to the AT&T store at 7:30 at night, rang they were open, and bought a brand new iPhone. That is how connected Kash is.
Wow.
It's sad.
That's a tragedy.
Yeah, for the death of my iPhone? Yes.
Well, first of all, the thought of you telling your pilot, hey, I just dropped a 1-pound brick approximately 800 feet over top of Los Angeles. I hope that's not an issue.
Yes. That fear factor actually did set in at that point. But anyway, I digress. It's just a story about how connected we are and how freaking sad it is, but it's true.
You know, I felt the same way when we had we call it Power Apocalypse here. We were like last month during the Freehold, or 2 months ago, I guess now, the Freehold presentation here in Indiana, we had a nasty storm roll through and we were without power for, ended up being 96 hours. And so during that time, all I could do, I couldn't even text you guys. And so I was just sitting there reading a book. And by the end of it, I'm like, we went to Starbucks. In fact, I got YouTube Premium for 1 month just so I could download the Ashes of Creation Freehold update and I could watch it at home. But
that's dedication, buddy.
Oh, thank you.
The desperation. Oh
yeah. Yeah, it was settling in. Nothing. I feel like nothing compares to the dropping the iPhone out of a helicopter story.
Oof.
Oh, gentlemen. Well, folks, thanks again so much for hanging out with us here on the show today. We're going to be talking about the Dünzenkell Dwarves. See, I'm 1 for 1 so far.
You are 1 for 1. Nice work.
Yeah, thank you. So anyway, it's our pre-Alpha 2 thoughts on this amazing race. And really, it's just one of those races, I guess the Dwarves as a whole, it's so incredibly iconic. And with Ashes of Creation bringing the Dünzenkell Dwarves, and really going from the Dünir to the Niküa, you just have these polar opposite like lifestyles. And we just thought, you know what? Let's talk about this race today. So here we are. But actually, before we get started, I feel like there's no better person to explain this than the creator himself. And this is from Stephen Sharif for the 2018 Extra Life stream. Let's take a listen real quick.
Deep in the mountains of Vera, legend tells of a forge created by the gods, from whence all dwarves are originated. Fabled to be the first created of the major races, the dwarves are said to have arrived on the continents with ships made of stone and steel. Dwarven smiths and craftsmen are found far and wide across Vera. The center of the Dwarven race is the nation of Dünzenkell, found deep in the northern mountains. Dwarven society tends to be heavily matriarchal, and their clans existing under the oftentimes eldest matriarch. Dwarves are closely connected to one another by alliances forged between family guilds. The dwarven child is marked at a young age with his or her guild sigil. Some dwarves banished from Dünzenkell or having chose to walk a path alone will often have their sigils burned from their skin. The Dünzenkell nation, deep within the northern mountains of Vera, exists the oldest nation in the world. The Dünzenkell have been known as many names over the ages, but only one name has graced the highest mountain, within which their capital has stood since the beginning of recorded history, Dün. The dwarves of the Dünzenkell rule through a council of guilds. A royal family is chosen once every 200 years by this council to rule. Currently, the right to rule falls on the shoulders of King Grimle. It has been nearly 400 years since a king has led the Dünzenkell. Traditionally, this role falls to the matriarchs of a family. Expeditions are often sent into the underrealm from Dün, and there many believe lies the source of secrets among the dwarves and their success with mastering artisanship. Untold magic lies deep within Vera, its source not known to many. Dünzenkell has long benefited from this source though it has fueled the expansion of the Dwarven kingdoms throughout the northern mountains.
That was I wonder what brand of chips that was there that was being eaten.
I feel like they were kettle cooked for sure, like some sort of kettle cooked chips, and possibly at the end they were bussing a table.
Yeah, I was gonna say we really got to work on the acoustics there in Steven's living room, dining room.
How dare you, Steven? I have this.
We're such audiophiles. It's hilarious. I want to dive in here real quick because I was very excited about getting into this dwarf stuff. It is such an iconic race. So I actually went through and started doing a little bit of research on not just the history of dwarves in games, but the history of dwarves in folklore and where they came from. I always thought that the thought process and theory came from Tolkien, because he was one of the earliest to like write about it and get everything down on paper. But it turns out that a lot of it really doesn't come from that. It comes from Germanic folklore, which I had no idea that this was a thing, but essentially Norse mythology is where a lot of this stuff comes from. And it's no different with the dwarves. The dwarves have always been presented in Germanic folklore as living in mountainous regions and having a very high skill in artisanship. And I thought that was really cool. And there's a very close distinction between dwarves and elves in Norse mythology. Quick little fun fact here. I have a couple of fun facts I think you guys are really going to like on this.
I do love fun facts.
Well, you're really going to like this. Stay tuned.
I'm gonna love it.
So believe it or not, in Germanic folklore, there was that nexus between the dwarves and elves. And most notably, where this came from is a poem that was called Voluspa, which actually included the name Gandalfur.
Get out.
You get out. It means wand elf.
What?
Yes, I'm not kidding. It's Gandalf with an R at the end. Gandalfur. I don't know how you would pronounce it in Germanic, but Gandalfur. I thought that was like the coolest freaking thing. I was like, wait, what? But wait, there's more. Check this out. I think this is super relevant to the day we are recording this podcast right now. Is just a few days after the release of something pretty big. So anyway, here's another fun fact. While researching this dwarven Norse mythology, I discovered something quite relevant and quite timely. The name of the son of the god Odin and the goddess Frigg is named Balder.
No.
Yes, not like Balder than Kash, like Baldur's Gate.
Oh
and
my gosh.
that blew my mind. I'm like, excuse me, what? Like, so a lot of fantasy, it really is derived from this German folklore.
It's amazing how so many books that were truly instrumental, I would say like novels of our time, like novels of our lives as humans, just stem from folklore or stem from these particular locations. I believe it took Tolkien, I want to say it was 12 years to completely finish Lord of the Rings. And a lot of the things he pulled from were folklore or tales and or real life locations. And it's just incredible how something like the dwarven race can become so incredibly iconic. And, you know, I guess I'll just go back to Lord of the Rings, you know, the whole Lord of the Rings trilogy. We had The Hobbit come out. We now have Baldur's Gate 3, which is an amazing game.
Oh,
You know, it's just crazy.
You know, and J.K. Rowling, I remember when Harry Potter came out and people were, I mean, obviously most of the world was fascinated by these books, but you'd hear some people say, oh, you know, she's just stealing things from other stories as far as, you know, creativity and races and things like that. I'm like, this is the way to do it. This is what it's always been. I mean, it has been standing on the shoulders of giants for eternity. This is how we have in our mind that elves are a lithe, sort of fluid type of being, and dwarves are stout and drink beer and mine ore. It is not new. It is something that has come forever. And so when you tell me that it goes back to Germanic folklore, that is phenomenal. And it's just perfect too, right? To think of that these kind of tropes that we all know, that we have all lived in every game and every fantasy book that we've ever read, that they go back hundreds and hundreds of years, is just so perfect in my mind. And it almost makes me think of the kind of people that have those conspiracy theories that with every tale there's a grain of truth, and wherever there's fire wherever there's smoke there was fire at some point. That you have this history of maybe there was some magic back in the day, the sort of King Arthur style of philosophy, that magic did kind of exist back then, and it doesn't anymore, but that doesn't mean that things weren't different a couple thousand years ago, or maybe for King Arthur not quite that long. But it's cool to see stuff like that, to think that Tolkien was standing on the shoulders of Germanic lore or something like that, and to see a name like Baldur or Gandalfer show up has got to just be one of those oh snap moments where you just stop what you're doing, you're like, excuse me? Did you
Exactly.
say Gandalfer?
Yeah,
Exactly. Like that's where that actually came from. You know that's where that came from. And I love the fact that I just on a whim opened up the wiki or a wiki and started looking up some of the stuff in relation to dwarves. And then all these things started popping up, and there is nothing that is more intriguing and really will turn me into an investigator than some type of a nexus between the lore in a game and real life. Now, I'm not saying folklore is real life, but this really came true for me in New World, because a lot of New World's lore was based off of some real things in it was based off of real world locations. I'm not saying that the island that everybody was on was a real world location, but the history of the conquistadores and all that different stuff in that time period was very, very time appropriate for me to be able to dive into that kind of stuff. And to see this in a game that we love already just made me very, very excited. Here's just a little snippet of that. This comes straight from a wiki. German folklore tells that one can hear a forge from within a mound and feel furnace fires under the earth. While in Switzerland, the heat can be attributed to the underground kitchens of dwarves. In one example, the heat of the furnace is believed to increase the fertility of the soil.
just so
Pretty
cool.
cool.
It's awesome.
So cool.
It's so cool. And what's neat too is how you see things like that have been brought into the personalities of the dwarves. Like anytime I see a dwarf, whether it's Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit, and sorry folks, I'm probably going to say that a lot, those two films and books series.
You mean that you're going to reference the possibly two most influential things in our lifetime?
Yes.
The Lord of the Rings book series and the enormous volume of movies that got put out as well.
Yes, precisely. I have no idea why.
Fair. That seems fair. You may continue.
Well, thank you, sir. One thing I've always enjoyed. One thing I have always enjoyed is the warm personality. So, like you talk about, the forges being lit, or the cooking, etc. It's like that is instilled, at least in media, within their personalities. They always have this really warm vibe, always almost jovial, lighthearted. but a real sense of home, you know, and the value of home and family and brotherhood. Absolutely love it.
Yeah, just like in the World of Warcraft when you're talking to the NPC and he's like, keep those irons on the fire. Hi. Hi.
Yeah, like if you're gonna go have a drink and you have the choice between the elf and the dwarf, come on, right?
Yeah.
Whose house are you going to? You're going for the party. You're gonna get the
Absolutely.
salted meat. You're gonna get the good beer. You're going to the dwarf party. That is for sure where you're going. The elf, you might get a berry and a spinach wrap or something, but the dwarven place is where it's at.
It reminds me of seeing The Hobbit when they're all sitting there and they're offered all the food from the elf, and he goes, "Where's the meat?" Oh, so good, so good. So we've got two different races here, fellas, with the Ashes of Creation dwarves. They're actually pretty cool.
I love that they split these. First of all, the way that they have done the races on this, I love that they don't just have dwarf or elf or orc, that they have these subdivisions, because that's really how you want to be able to play one of these things. To get everyone to agree on what kind of dwarf they want to play or what kind of elf they want to play is difficult, and it's unnecessary. If you are able to put the effort in to have two very different kinds of splits of peoples, it is a really cool thing, and it offers a lot of opportunity for creativity. So go on and explain these two, but I love what they're doing with the way that they're splitting these types of races.
So the two different types of dwarves that we have are, just in a nutshell, we have the Dünir and the Niküa. And the Dünir are going to be your typical mountain-born artisan living deep in the hills and the mountains dwarves, just like any dwarves from pretty much anything out there. The dwarves from Elder Scrolls, which, they were just a big giant race of subterranean type dwarves who centered around science and engineering and crafting and all that stuff. And that's really what the Dünir are.
They're your
And
dwarfy
then-
dwarfs, right?
These are your dwarfy dwarves for
Yes.
sure. Not like the whistle while you work type dwarves. These are actually hardy, two-handed axe bearing, long beard, braided beard, just armor wearing, clinking, freaking dwarves. That's what they are. Think Gimli from Lord of the Rings. Once again, we should put a little ding every time.
Yeah,
we
no kidding.
talk about Lord of the Rings or Tolkien, because it really is. It's just super iconic. But then, in true intrepid / Stephen the Creator style, they have thrown in something different in the Niküa. And it is an absolute fact that all three of us here love the Niküa. We have some YouTube videos up. Sonny just did an amazing video, one of our 5-minute opinion videos on the Niküa. And I just think that they are one of the most unique spins of a race in a video game. And I love it. And the reason being is because the Niküa did not like said mountain life. They basically said, F this, we want the beach.
I want my tan.
And they
dog.
bailed. And they bailed. Now, granted, when you talk about the timeline of when this took place, the dwarves that left the mountain were still mountain dwarves. But over time, as they migrated to the coastal areas and learned to live off the land, and they homesteaded the coastal areas and learned how to hunt and fish and do all the things that one would do if they homesteaded on the coastline. They got tan. They started to change the look a little bit, much more resilient toward the sun. And then you have this island culture dwarf that over centuries evolved. And I absolutely love it. And the cultural influence is Polynesian. So what do you think when you think Polynesian? I think steel drums. I think grass skirts. I think poo-poo platters. And just all kinds of fun type of music and throwing fruit at each other and fishing and just having a great life with your family. That's what I think of when I think of Polynesian. And I love this spin. It's the coolest spin on a dwarf.
Oh, agreed. 1,000%. I feel like every day's a party. When every day's easy living, you know, the Niküa. And not to mention, you really get the vibe whenever you see the wallpapers that AshesOfCreation put out on their website. The island vibe, the whole vibe, and even the most recent. Was it this? I don't think it was. I think it was last month's pre-order pack was Niküa themed, and you would see just the Islander vibes, the whole Islander themes just coming out, and it's just, you're right. It's such a unique take, and I'll be honest, I'm really glad that they made this choice because this is it. This is the only time this has ever happened in an MMO. It's a first, and it's really cool to see them lean into that from not only an appearance standpoint with the tattoos and all that. Oh, hey, quick note. Did you guys know? Sorry, this is off topic. Speaking about tattoos, did you know that achievements in this game, like you can get a scar from fighting the dragon, and people can inspect you and see, oh, they have the scar, they beat the dragon. It's like you walk away with battle damage that you can put on your body
I did not know that.
through achievement form. Pretty cool, huh? Yeah.
Pretty amazing. And the other thing too is that they're, from what I understand, speaking of tattoos, I mean, I'm obviously a fan of them. I love that the customization on characters, and particularly it's be the same case of the Niküa. You're gonna have the ability to put like tribal tattoos and that kind of stuff on. Now, I really hope that they have some kind of option. This is also off topic, but I really hope that there's some kind of option for like more traditional type tattoos that can go on your character. But anyway, I digress. To be able to have this kind of difference in the same race, but now you have these two completely different cultures is just, it's pretty mind-blowing, and it's very ingenious. Like, definitely hats off for coming up with something new and unique on this one.
Yeah, I mean, you guys know that I have an enormous love for the Niküa as far as a creation idea goes. The fact that you could have a dwarf in the true sense still available. When I played World of Warcraft with Mickey back in the day, I asked Mickey, what kind of character he wanted to be. He's like, I want to be a dwarf. Dwarfs are awesome. They're in the mountains, they're mining. And then he listed off all of the things that dwarves are. He's like, yes, I love that character. And there will be people that play this game that love dwarves in the truest Dünir dwarf type of sense. And that's the way they want their dwarves. But if you want something truly unique, then you have this option, which is so fantastic to be able to provide this totally unique Maori dwarf. And as I didn't even think about this, but as you were explaining it, there is a very close connection with Polynesian lifestyle to that traditional dwarf lifestyle. It's big on family. It's big on gathering. Its culture is very, very strong, and they want to stay together in all forms. Dwarves are not lone wolves. There's no lone wolf dwarves out there. They stay in packs, they do everything together, and they build on family together. The only difference is the one loves the mountains and one doesn't love the mountains. So you take that one difference, and this is true evolution theory, right? Where you change one little thing and you spin them off and let them go for 1,000 years and see where they end up. And where one of them ends up is a tiki party, and where the other one ends up is buried under the earth. It's so fantastic that you just have all of these differences, but at the same time, you can see the connective tissue between the ancient races of dwarves. So the exploration side of it, the people that didn't want to be buried under the mountain, and they become into navigation, they become into boats, and they become into space and sky and sea. And that's the real That's the real difference. All the other stuff is functionally the same. They're big on family. They want parties. They love to drink. They love their dwarf lifestyle. It's just that one difference that makes it so cool. And when you break it down like that, it's totally plausible that this is a thing that happened. But I cannot tell you another game where you had a difference like this with a character trope like a dwarf. It is truly unique and truly different, but at the same time just so logical that I love it.
I love that point you made. If two races were to just branch off and see where where it goes, like an experiment. Let's see where this goes 1,000 years from now. And here you are. You have the Dünir dwarves from the customization we've seen. That's very much the fantasy stout armor, wearing women with beard dwarves. Which, by the way, the females that can have beards, I think that is the coolest thing in this game. I think it's
Wait,
so
what?
cool. Yeah, that's right. And then you've got the Niküa, which are known for having almost like a halfling appearance with no facial hair. Like totally polar opposite. And it just, gosh, I'm gonna sound like a broken record. I love the fact that they leaned into that they really just took it to like the 1000th degree. If these two races were to get here, what would it be like? And you see that in the architecture. I know I already said this, but the wallpapers, one part I forgot to mention was the architecture, like of their walls. It's just it's just logs just surround, or like their platforms, like everything's just very rough, and then you see the Dünir, where everything is very precise. It reminds me of the Dwemer in a way from Elder Scrolls Online, with the way the angles are. It's just.
Oh, you mean that race that we'll never understand the history of because somebody's keeping their cards too close to their chest? You mean that one?
Todd.
Thanks, Todd.
Thanks, Todd.
Anyway, yeah, I love the fact that you can have the same, and it's no different than the human race, right? You can have one race, and they're so vastly different. You got folks over here up in the mountains, and they're all wearing this intricate armor, and they're drinking bourbon barrel stouts, and then all the way down there on the beach, which they can probably see from the mountains, they're down there having luau's and drinking mai tais and coladas, right? I love it. The one thing that does remain is that both dwarven societies have maintained this matriarchal structure. Jibbs, matriarchal means the girls are in charge.
Oh, thank you. I didn't realize that.
You're welcome. So now I guess it's a question for both of you. Does that present some kind of a traditional challenge? Because everybody knows like how strong and domineering a male dwarf can be, right?
Sure. Yep.
What kind of challenges would that present to a race that is traditionally in fantasy and folklore just dominated by these strong masculine male? What does that prove, and how cool of a spin is that?
I like the spin. I think that there are definitely throughout history examples in real life and in fantasy of strong matriarchal societies, and so it's not groundbreaking by any means, but it is a cool spin to have that kind of thing. When you have, especially when they talk about the eldest matriarch, so that makes it more to the norm, I would say. When you have those village elder type of situations where there's a lot of decisions that get made on the fly and war and everything like that, but before we make a big cultural decision here, let's run it through the matriarch, or let's run it through the patriarch, let's run it through the village elders. And that kind of telling and that kind of structure really, it exemplifies what kind of familial love there is in those kind of races where you have dwarves. You're going to get that. Humans, much more rare. you're going to see things like democracy, and you're going to see stuff like republics, and there's going to be voting, and there's going to be backstabbing, and that is just a very human trait. But when you start to deal with things like elder matriarch decision making, that to me fits the dwarf society more than it does some of the other ones. So it's not a huge surprise to see them go in that way, but I like that they're leaning into it. And I also like that they're leaning into it on both sides of the dwarf coin. In the dwarfy dwarfs under the mountains, they have that for sure, but also they still have it in the island tiki dwarfs, that it is something that stayed. When they split, they still stayed with that matriarchal society, and I really like that, because I can just picture in my mind that old woman dwarf that is sitting there, and she's tended to by some of the younger grandchildren dwarves, and she really does have power in the decision making. You see those movies where the old matriarch like walks out, and she looks like Keith Richards with just stuff hanging off of her, and when she speaks, people listen, and that is a cool thing. But it really fits the dwarven society to me.
Yeah, absolutely. I think from a personality standpoint, Kash, to kind of, and I can't remember exactly how you worded it, so I'll paraphrase. Whenever you have, say, a male dwarf that's very passionate, very vocal, very bold, how do you deal with that from a matriarchal standpoint? Well, you have equally as bold, equally as grizzled women to rise up and meet that, that personality trait. And so that from the personality side, from a writing standpoint, I love well-written female characters in shows and movies, etc. I believe good writing trumps everything. When I always use this in podcasting, but when you go and you watch Avengers Endgame and you see Scarlet Witch fight Thanos, without giving a spoiler, she says to him, "You took everything from me." And she says, "I don't even know," Thanos says, "I don't even know who you are." And she says, "You will." And she just starts laying into him. And I'm just sitting back like, oh my gosh, you were scared. It was amazing. Oh man, it was amazing. I loved it. I just love good writing, strong female characters. And I would expect nothing less from the Dünzenkell Dwarves. You have that matriarchal, that respect there. That's kind of what you were saying, Sonny, between the way that they look to this woman, from a respect standpoint, from someone that they honor, someone that, and most importantly, they listen to. And it's just I think it goes back to my original point about the dwarves, was it goes back to this family vibe, this very knit family vibe. And there's a certain level of respect that seems to be maintained there. And I don't see anything different here with the Dünir specifically. Just the very old school fantasy vibes and a high respect for their matriarch.
Yeah, when I think matriarch, for a long time when I think matriarch, I think the Drizzt series in Menzo Berenzan, where Drizzt comes from. It's a Dungeons and Dragons series of books. And it's amazing, written by Salvatore, just amazing. But the difference here between the matriarchal society in Menzo Berenzan, where the Drow are from, is that how do I put this lightly? Them girls is cray. Like they.
That was eloquently and understated.
Perfect. Well, I want the young people to understand what I'm saying. So they cray. Right? They will eat their own, and they have this power over the men to where like they will beat them into submission. I think the difference here in the dwarven matriarchal society is family. You have that family love behind you, and that's where the difference really comes in. And I love to see how that is how it's gonna meld in both of the dwarven cultural races that we have here. Mm-hmm. One thing that I do want to move on to a little bit is this matriarchal society where the females are in charge, how do you think that's going to clash with the other races that are out there, such as the elves, because the elves are very traditionally, even in Vera, traditionally patriarchal, where the men are in charge. So you have a council of all the races. How do you think that's going to play out?
Well, this was going to be a question that I was going to pose to you, because I think that you're kind of our resident lore master here, but the current situation is not entirely as matriarchal as it usually is. So the nation of Dünzenkell right now, they pick their rulers about every 200 years with the royal family, but it's currently led in Ashes of Creation by a king, King Grimlay. So this is a rare occurrence. So to pose the question of how do you think this is going to play out, I guess it's kind of a cop-out, because it isn't going to play out. You have the typically matriarchal society being run by a patriarch for the time that we will play this game. Now, it would be very curious and a cool thing to do to see whether or not that guy struggles trying to maintain control over his own people, let alone the other people, because he's, if you can imagine a typically patriarchal society being run by a matriarch, that would be 100% in the cards. I'm currently watching The Great, the hilarious series on Catherine the Great, but that's kind of one of those things that is a constant thing, right? Where you have the matriarch in a typical patriarchal society, but this is flipped. So yeah, you have the question of how is it going to work with the other races in the world versus how's it going to work even inside of dwarven culture for this King Grimlay situation?
Do you think maybe it wasn't like a family choice? Maybe there was literally some female dwarf that just royally effed up some stuff, and they thought, nah, we should probably give the dude a shot.
What if it was an abdication? What if a matriarch gave it to a patriarch?
See, that I'm leaning more towards that, or something normally doesn't go on went on. In other words, some kind of shady stuff.
How did we get here, right?
Yeah.
This does come up to a similar thing. There is a male dwarf in power during the time of Delia's Diary when the cataclysm took place. And don't worry, we will cover Delia's Diary, which is fantastic. That was a time where a male dwarf was in power, and then he was no longer in power, and then his daughter took over immediately, which was pretty cool.
So they put a dude in charge and he ended the world.
No, he ended up dying of a mysterious illness, which the lore has not gone into yet, but that was all during the telling of Delia's Diary, which was told by a young female dwarf. At the time, she told the story of how her family survived or didn't survive the apocalypse, the fall.
That is such a
Great
good
story.
video, and I can't wait for them to see it.
It's a great video.
Oh man, it's good.
Super fun.
It's really
Super good. Super good.
Oh.
I'm gonna flip things just a little bit here as we get towards the end of the show here, and I wanted to talk about magic and artisanship. Now, dwarves with artisanship, I think, is pretty well covered ground. If you want well-crafted armor, you're gonna get it from a dwarf or an elf. And they're going to look like two different things. The dwarf armor is going to be something that lasts forever with very angled and functional lines to it. The elf armor is going to be ornate and made of very complicated light metals, right?
And it's very stuck up.
Very stuck up. It's going to be, there's going to be a massive upcharge on it, and you're probably going to have to tip. And that is just, it just comes with a whole series of baggage that you're not going to get with that solid dwarf armor. But magic, to me, is kind of untrodden territory when it comes to dwarves. So, JB, do you want to talk a little bit about how dwarves are dealing with magic in Ashes of Creation?
Well, I only know a little, to be honest with you. I know that, at least from a lore standpoint, the dwarves connection to magic. Well, per the wiki, really, it's shaped their society's technological advancements and cultural achievements and ethical considerations that might arise from their use of the essence. Essentially, I'm wondering more so than anything, and kind of harkening back to what we saw with the cleric. One resource, being the essence, can be taken and used in so many different ways. You see the mage and how their spells look. You see the cleric and how they really totally different vibe, but they still pull from the same essence resource. And then you have the dwarves, who are very, at least right now, which I love that Intrepid is holding their cards close to their hand on this, is they're clearly tapping into this as well, and they're using this from a technological advancement standpoint, not to mention cultural. And that I think we will probably see more when we're in the game and experiencing that. I look at this with more questions than answers, I feel like. And I think that there's a certain level of mystery that comes along with that that's going to be very satisfying to see play out.
By design, I think, too. You nailed it right on the head when you said that there's mystery to this, and that is absolutely by design on the side of Intrepid. They're not going to give all their secrets out, but that's going to be stuff that we are going to discover as we traverse the world. And that's exactly how it should be. But the thing that kind of hits me is when you have magic infused in these fantasy worlds, there's not a whole lot that you can do. I suppose there is, but it is good to just kind of, as we were saying before, stand on the shoulders of giants and stick with the formula that really works. It's the same thing with like midichlorians. They're in every living thing. It's the same thing with the essence, right? It's infused in the dirt. It's in every atom, in every particle in Vera. The essence is there. It's just whether or not somebody can tap into it and how well they can do so. So the question I have is, the dwarves, being one of the oldest, if not the oldest race on Vera, they have found a way to tap into this magic, this essence. Most likely, in my opinion, in my humble, I don't know jack crap opinion about the lore and stuff that's kind of going on in there that we haven't found yet, they live in the mountain. They live underground. Is that not where the essence might be coming from? Say the core of Vera, and seeping through the mountain, seeping through those areas, and perhaps the dwarves, as they're mining for resources and living in those areas underground, have tapped into wells of essence. Look at the areas of the Underdark. When you look at some of those areas that are beneath Vera's crust, you see plants, animals, all the flora and fauna seemingly looks like they are infused with essence.
Yeah.
Who's to say that the dwarves have not also found essence infused, or
There it is.
that they can use in the creation of these things that they're creating? And even to go a little further, do the dwarves on Vera have a deeper understanding of the essence and its uses?
When you originally were talking, and specifically when JB was talking, it gave me vibes of Wakanda. It gave me vibes of the digging and the finding of this resource that then changes an entire civilization with vibranium in Wakanda. All of a sudden, everything revolves around this. But then you transitioned it into a much more appropriate sense, which is that the essence is not just something that is found deep. Now, it may originate deep, which is interesting, and on Kash's point, that you may be finding truer like wells of it or things like that to be able to access that. But the essence is ultimately probably permeating the entire world, and every culture is using it in the ways that their culture thinks is appropriate. And so the dwarves, when you say, do the dwarves have a better understanding of the use of essence, it's almost like 6 in one hand, half dozen in the other. Like, is it a better use of essence to craft it into armor and weapons in a dwarf style? Or is it a better use of essence to use it in a magic sense like a human would?
Perhaps the Dünir are using it for armor and weapons to infuse those to be more magical, and the Niküa are using them to make better Mai Tais.
I mean, if you can't use all the resources to make your Mai Tai better than the guy down the street in his tiki bar, then I don't know what you're doing.
Infuse pineapple wedges and
Sonny,
little umbrellas glowing.
You have to be a Niküa. You have to have a tiki themed tavern.
Can you imagine? Can you imagine?
I will move my whole operation to the coast if your freehold is Niküa.
Oh my God. This is my essence infused lava flow. It is a fabulous
Oh
drink.
my gosh. Oh, that's so good.
Oh, the genius of being able to split the dwarven cultures into two different things and then have them, like you said, have them take the same resource with the essence that is all around and use it in their own cultural way is something that I had not thought about at all until you said it. And it's such a revelation to think that this is, it would be like if you had the world spinning around and everyone's doing their normal Tolkien thing, and all of a sudden you just sprinkle the planet with magic and see what each different culture does with it, because there's no way that they do the same thing. They're hardwired to think different ways. Their entire being revolves around behaving certain ways. And so you introduce this wild card, the same wild card, to every single civilization and see what happens. And that to me is a fascinating sort of divergence between the cultures.
Man, good
Armed
conversation.
Dwarves, awesome.
So awesome. And I think that that's probably going to be the race I land on. I keep going back and forth privately conversations, but I think it's definitely going to be the Dünir for me because, man, this was so much fun. I can't wait to do the other races.
You roll dwarves in World of Warcraft. You just rolled a main dwarf
I did.
in Baldur's Gate 3. I know where you're headed, for sure. You have a beard, right?
Yeah,
You drink beer.
it's true.
Okay. So speaking of dwarves, this is it. Last thing, I know we want to close the show. I really don't want to close the show. I want to go for like 6 more hours, but you guys have to go to bed because you're old. So what happened? I blacked out for a second. What I want to know is you can take any medium you want. It can be books, it can anything in pop culture, right? Let's just simplify this now. Anything in pop culture. I want to know what your favorite dwarf is in pop culture.
I have a hard time with this because I don't love dwarves. I am not a dwarf guy like JB is. JB loves to roll dwarves. I almost never, ever would do that. In this case, it is something totally different for me with the Niküa because I'm just kind of fascinated, and it's going to take a big push for me to roll a Niküa. We're going to have to see how it plays out, but I typically roll a human female. That is my go-to for these kind of things. So when you ask me, who's your favorite dwarf? It's a hard one for me, but I'm going to go with Balin, and I love his reserved nature as a dwarf. He is different from the other dwarves in the Tolkien world, where he was old and he was wise and he was patient, which is not something that is normally associated with a dwarf. Patience is not their virtue. He saw things play out and he took a minute and said, is this the best course of action for us? Because I've been around and I've seen things go badly, and he's constantly offering these nuggets of wisdom like a grandfather would to children. And
Like Gandalf.
like Gandalfer, except Gandalfer kind of, you weren't real sure if Gandalfer was high all the time. And like, does he remember this? Is this coming from another like cosmic universe, or is
Confirmed. He was high.
Because, you know, it doesn't give me a lot of confidence when we're lost in the mines and he says, follow your nose. I mean, like, I could have done that. That's not great advice. So, but Balin just seems like the kind of dwarf that I really think broke the mold a little bit on dwarves. And I love that about him.
We dwarves are natural sprinters, very dangerous over short distances. Gimli, 1000%. Gimli, and more Gimli. A close second would be Thorin Oakenshield. Gimli, to me, watching the Two Towers, when he looks at Aragorn and says, "Toss me." What? Toss me.
Not by the beard.
Not by the beard. Oh, it's just so good. It's so good. And then you watch The Hobbit. I'm gonna gush for a second. You watch The Hobbit, and the way they're fighting, the way that they are fighting in against I forget the exact enemy, but obviously it was some kind of orc, and they are literally the most unintentional / effective fighters ever. The way they're just jumping around, landing on their gut, rolling over, using their bodies as like basically bowling balls. I mean, just a massive show of unintentional effectiveness, and just I love it, man. Good. Go back to Gimli, 1000% Gimli. He was very proud of his family heritage. He was proud of his race, and it was really cool to see his character develop and the friendship that ended up becoming so important to him with Legolas and Aragorn on the films. I'm not speaking to the books. I'm speaking strictly.
It's absolutely in the books.
Is it?
It is 100%. Yes, because I've been training for a marathon and I go running for these stupid long times. And so I've been listening to Lord of the Rings in the books. And I had that same thought where, is this a thing they threw in the movies where these two become friends? No, it is 1000% in the books. It is exactly how Tolkien wrote it, that Gimli the dwarf befriended Legolas the elf, and it had huge repercussions in every place that they went. It is 100% in the books.
Yeah, because they were I wouldn't say mortal, but they were pretty damn big enemies.
Dwarves and elves. Dwarves, oil and water with dwarves and elves. Just not something that was done.
Yeah, for sure. Jibbs, I love that you went with Gimli. I thought for sure you were going to go with like Sneezy Dwarf or something like that.
It's dopey. Yeah. Is that why? Because it's something I relate to. Do I news you?
Because it was more simple.
Do I make you?
It was easier.
Well, what's your favorite dwarf then? Smart.
Okay, I'm this one. I don't know if I think a lot of people will know that. I mean, we're in good company. We're here with a bunch of nerds and dorks. They're our people. We are them. They are us. Okay, mine is Brunner Battlehammer, and he is from the Drizzt series, written by R.A. Salvatore, which is up to something like 4,000 books at this point. I mean, it's crazy. I think I don't know 30, maybe 35 books. But it's D&D. It's Forgotten Realms. It's fantastic series. I'm probably, I don't know, maybe 7 or 8 books in. I usually listen to them on my way to work on Audible. I love them. Anyway, Brunner Battlehammer is one of Drizzt's party members. He's the last line of the Battlehammer clan at Mithril Hall and the Lord of the Dwarves of Icewind Dale. What I love about him so much is that he's the adoptive father to Catti Bree, who's a really cool female character, and she ends up being the love interest of Drizzt. Sorry about the spoiler. He's so incredibly tough on the outside. By the way, his sigil on his shield is a freaking mug of beer.
Oh, heck yeah.
It doesn't get better than that. I'm sorry. That's pretty badass. But he's so incredibly tough. But when it comes to his daughter, he's got a soft center. That's me. It's 100% me.
Yeah.
I love it. I mean, granted, I'm probably a lot taller than Brunner, but he's just such a freaking cool character. So if you're into D&D, if you're into fantasy, man, dive into the Drizzt series. It's probably the best D&D series out there.
Wow. Gentlemen, this was a great discussion. on the dwarves. I really am chomping at the bit. I can't wait to do the other ones. Wow. Well, thank you everyone so much for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed this episode of LoreForged, and if you did, we want to hear from you. Please take a moment and leave a review on whatever podcast app you're using. Just by taking a few minutes and leaving a review, you help other gamers like you find this show and decide if this show's right for them. Plus, not to mention every 5-star review, written review on Apple Podcasts that we get, Spotify when they add them, we'll of course read them right here on the show. We want to hear from you. So please, if you haven't done so already, take a couple minutes and leave that review. You can always call us 516-875-1776. If you want your voicemail to be played on the show, try to keep it around a minute or less. And of course, you can always email us. We love to hear from our listeners. So please let us know what you think of the dwarves. Do you plan to roll one? What are some of your favorite from pop culture? You can always email us contact@LoreForged.com.
What are your favorite dwarven tiki drinks? Don't forget to visit us at LoreForged.com for all of our written content surrounding Ashes of Creation. You can also find links to quite literally everything we do on LoreForged.com. We have our YouTube channel, which is spectacular. It's my favorite thing in the world. Thank you, Kash. That is at youtube.com/@LoreForged. Twitch, where I've been kind of living, and that is twitch.tv/LoreForgedHQ. And finally, Patreon, if you want to support the show in a little bit of an extra way. That is fabulous. We love you very much for that. You can get all of our content a little bit early and much more at patreon.com/LoreForgedHQ.
Adventurers, if you are hearing our voices on podcast feeds, then our Discord community is open for you to join the adventure there as well. So you can click on the button on our web page at loreforged.com. You can also follow us on Twitter or X or whatever your poison, whatever you want to call it. That's where we're at. Jibbs is at Jibbs IRL. Myself is at Kash. Sorry, having a slight stroke, but it seems to have cleared. Cash Quests and the Caches with a K, and Sunny at you, of course. But most importantly, don't forget to follow the show. We're going to have lots of stuff there as well for you to follow at Twitter at LoreForgedHQ.
Friends, thank you so much for tuning in. Have a wonderful week, and we'll see you back here next Monday, live on LoreForged. Take care.
Peace, love, and honeybees.
Safe travels, adventurers.